Now that we have the crouching working inside of our blueprint character, let's go ahead and do that inside of the animation blueprint. So let's go to the blueprints folder, click on player, animations, and let's go into the animation blueprint. Now inside of here, again, you can go back to the animation graph over here. You can click on your state machine. And inside of here, we need to make a new state. So let's drag from here and let's write or click on this one state. And here, let's write crouch. So now we're going to make the crouch. Now you don't have to make it down here. You can also just drag it here to the side or up here. I just like to drag it down here for the crouch. I just imagine that I'm crouching, going down here. And then we can double click on this crouch state. And over to the right, we made this one crouch unarmed. We can drag this blend space into the graph and then we can connect it. And remember, we already made the movement direction and speed, so we can drag and plug them into here. And then let's compile. Now we get an error or a warning here because we have not made the transition. So let's go back here in the animation graph. You can go back to your state machine. And inside of here, you see now this circle. And this circle is a transition rule. You have to tell your game when do you want to go from the idle run mode to the crouch mode. You have to give it a transition. And now if you double click it, here you can see here is the transition, the boolean. So we have to give it a transition. And the way you do this, first you have to go to the event graph and do some code before you can give it a transition. You have to know when the player is crouching. Now if you go back to our player in the player base and you go back here in our crouch function, if you double click here, we made this one called crouch, this boolean here. Remember, it's not the local boolean that we made. It's this one global boolean that variable that we made. This one we can use to know if the player is crouching or not, and we can use it here inside of the animation blueprint. So first we have to get the reference to the player. Right now this is a player pawn, but we need a reference to the player base because now we need to use this boolean here. So let's go back here and go back to the interfaces folder. Let's right click, go to blueprint and make a new blueprint interface. And let's call this one int player base because we want to reference to the player base. Let's open it up, and here inside of this blueprint interface, just like for the player controller, if you don't remember, you can go ahead and watch the player controller interface when we made it here. It's actually the same thing. So you can click here, click on F2 to change the name and say get player ref. So getting the player reference. You can also just call it get player base reference. That's the same thing. And then you can click on this function, go ahead and here in the output, go ahead and make a new variable. And remember here, you have to select whatever you are trying to reference to. We're trying to reference to BP player base. Go ahead and select it. And let me just call this one player. And I can compile now and going to the player base, going to the actually not class defaults, the class settings. And in here, in the interfaces, click on add and search for the ints player base, this one. Go ahead and compile and you will see this interface. Remember, if you don't see this, even though you have added it, you have to compile inside of the interface before you can see it. Very important. So clicking on the get player reference, and here we can drag again and write self, just like before, because remember, we are in the player base. So we're just telling that this variable here is this player base. So now we can go to actually let's compile first. Now we can go to the animation blueprint, and here we already have the player pawn. I'm actually, instead of just dragging from here, let me just create a new variable. I'm just going to drag it over here and place it and click on get. And I'm just going to use it here instead of dragging from here. I think it will look a bit messy when the lines are over all of the code. So let me just take it here as a new one and say get player ref. Now we have this get player ref. Let's go ahead and connect it. Now we can use the variable. So now if you drag from here and write crouch, and actually a small trick I want to show you, if you're at crouch and you want to use the Boolean variable, variables are always found down here. So you can see this is the crouch variable that we need. However, if you don't see it, you can always make a space and write variable. So var for variable, and you will be able to see all the variables. So just a small trick to find it quickly. So getting this crouch variable that we have made, now I can right click this variable, promote it to a variable inside of here in the animation blueprint, and I'm just going to call it is crouching, just like that. Or you can just call it crouch, the same thing. Go ahead and connect it and click on compile. Okay, so now we are taking this crouch, we're taking the value of it here in the player base. So if it is true or false, we are taking that value and putting it inside of this variable. Now we can use this variable for the transition rule. So if I go back to the animation graph, to my state machine, and to this transition rule, you can go ahead and click on it. So now it's asking you, when should I go from the idle run to the crouch? And we can drag from here and plug it into here. So when we are crouching, so if is crouching is true, then we want to go ahead and transition. However, let's go back. We have to click on this and drag from here and plug it into here as well, because at some point we have to go from the crouch back to idle. So going and clicking on the second transition rule. So this is going back from crouch to run. So I'm going to drag this, and in here we can drag and write not B and select this one called not Boolean. So basically what we're saying is, if is crouching is false, then we want to go back to the running mode because we're not crouching anymore. And it will be false whenever you are not crouching because we set it here to false in the player base. So let's go ahead and compile, and now you can see all the errors are gone. And now let's see if we're missing anything. We have made everything here, plugged in the movement direction and speed. And also let's actually just try it out. So let's click on play. And I'm going to click on, actually, I'm stuck here as this player. Let me click on play again. And now I'm walking as this player here. I'm going to hold control to crouch, and you can see I am crouching. It is working. But you can see on my other screens, I am not crouching. And this is because we are now working in multiplayer. You can see I'm crouching as the server. The others cannot see I'm crouching. However, if I take this client here and I crouch, you can see the server can see I'm crouching. Just like that, if I'm crouching as the client. But if I'm crouching as the server, I am crouching. However, the clients cannot see that I'm crouching. And remember, in the previous lesson, I told you we are working in multiplayer, and the server has to send the information back to the client and tell the clients, hey, I'm crouching now, update my animation. The server has to send that information over, else they cannot see what I'm doing. And this is what we will be doing in the next lesson with the variable replication.